This wasn't a hostile takeover. It wasn't a market crash. The empire that the ruthless billionaire, Alistair Finch, had built was about to be brought to its knees by a single crimson smudge. A mark of no consequence, really, just a tiny fleck of color on the starched white collar of a man who owned entire city blocks. He'd scoffed at the humble waitress he met that morning, seeing her as less than nothing, a ghost in the machine of his fast-paced world. He had no idea this quiet, unassuming woman held a secret that wouldn't just cost him his dignity, but would shatter the very foundations of his billion-dollar empire. This is the story of how one man's arrogance became the weapon of his own destruction, a lesson etched not in ink, but in lipstick. Alistair Finch didn't just walk, he conquered. Each step of his polished Italian shoes on the marble floors of Finch Tower sounded like a judge's gavel. His world was a fortress of glass and steel, a vertical kingdom, and he was the undisputed king. From his penthouse office, the city below looks like a circuit board of lesser beings, all moving to a current he controlled. In his own mind, and on the cover of every major business magazine, he was infallible. The tower itself was a monument to his ego, 73 floors of intimidation, with his name blazing in letters 3 stories high. Inside, the air itself seemed to thin with altitude and ambition. Junior executives walked the hallways with their heads down, terrified of catching his eye. His reputation preceded him like a thunderclap, and in the decades since he'd taken his father's modest investment firm and transformed it into a global behemoth, he'd become known for 3 things: his brilliance, his ruthlessness, and his complete inability to see other people as human beings. His mornings began not with coffee but with carnage. He called it a board meeting. His board members called it the weekly reckoning. He stood before them, a predator surveying his kill. The conference room was silent, except for the nervous shuffling of papers and the occasional cough that sounded like a death rattle. "Thompson," Alistair's voice was like cracking ice. "Your division's numbers aren't just disappointing, they're an insult. You projected 7% growth. You delivered 4. Explain this to me. And please, try to use small words. I have a very busy, very expensive day ahead of me." A portly man in a suit that was suddenly 2 sizes too tight started to stammer. "Market fluctuations, Alistair. Unforeseen logistical hurdles. The supply chain issues in Southeast Asia." Alistair held up a hand, silencing the room more effectively than a gunshot. "Unforeseen, Thompson. The only thing unforeseen here is your continued employment. You see, in my world, there are no excuses. There are results and there is failure. You've delivered the latter in abundance. Pack your desk, security will escort you out. I want your access pass, your company car, and that pathetic glimmer of hope in your eyes extinguished before you reach the lobby." Thompson's face went from red to white to a sickly gray. 22 years with the company, gone in 30 seconds. Around the table, the other executives stared at their notes, relieved it wasn't them, terrified they might be next. "Anyone else have disappointing news they'd like to share?" Alistair asked, his tone almost pleasant now. The silence was absolute. "Excellent. Then we're done here. Oh, and Jenkins, your numbers were acceptable. Don't let that go to your head. Acceptable is the bare minimum. I expect exceptional by next quarter." No one argued. No one dared. This was Alistair Finch in his natural habitat, powerful, merciless, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. He thrived on the fear he cultivated, believing it was the most efficient tool for management. Kindness was a currency for the poor, and empathy was a liability. He dealt in power, and business was booming. After eviscerating his senior vice president, Alistair strode out, his personal assistant, a perpetually nervous young man named Carter, scurrying behind him like a frightened mouse. "Your car is waiting, Mr. Finch. You have the merger finalization with Rossi Corp. at 10 a.m. It's the big one, sir, the one that puts you on the global stage." "I am already on the global stage, Carter," Alistair snapped without breaking stride, his eyes never leaving his phone screen. Now, for the love of all that is holy, get me a real coffee, not that tepid sludge you brew in the office kitchen. Find a cafe, a small one, the kind of place where they still believe in the quaint notion of craft, and be quick about it. Time is the one asset even I can't buy more of." Carter nodded frantically, already pulling up maps on his phone as he jogged to keep pace. The limousine cut through traffic like a black shark in a sea of minnows, but a sudden protest march had gridlocked the main avenue. Horns blared, drivers shouted. Alistair's jaw tightened as he watched his carefully calibrated schedule dissolve into chaos. "I don't have time for this populist nonsense," he spat, glaring at his gold watch, a Patek Philippe worth more than most people's homes. "The cafe, Carter. Where is it?" Carter, frantically typing on his phone with sweating fingers, pointed a trembling finger through the tinted window. "There's one just there, sir. The Daily Grind. It seems independent. 4.3 stars on—" "Fine," Alistair huffed, his patience worn to a thread. "Wait here. I'll do it myself. It seems if I want anything done right, I have to do it myself." He threw the door open, the sounds of the city an unwelcome intrusion into his climate-controlled world. He shoved his way through the sidewalk crowd, his irritation radiating off him like a heat wave, and pushed open the door to the Daily Grind. A bell chimed mockingly above his head. The cafe was small, a world away from his own. The air smelled of roasted coffee and baked bread, a warm, cloying scent he found distasteful. Mismatched furniture gave
The boardroom of Rossi Corp was designed to intimidate, a cavern of dark mahogany and smoked glass on the 80th floor of their Manhattan headquarters. At the head of the table sat Isabella Rossi, the matriarch of a European dynasty whose corporate empire was older, quieter, and in many ways more powerful than Alistair's. Her hair was silver, swept back in an elegant chignon. Her eyes were the color of winter frost. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than a car, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone whose family had been making power moves since the Renaissance. She was not a woman you impressed with bluster. You impressed her with precision, with honor, with the understanding that a handshake meant something beyond a contract. Alistair entered the room, his armor of arrogance fully restored. The morning's incident was behind him, filed away in the garbage bin of his memory where he kept all unpleasant encounters with the lower classes. The water stain on his collar had dried to near invisibility, and the lipstick smudge remained unnoticed by him, a tiny assassin waiting for its moment. "Isabella," he said, his voice smooth as silk, extending his hand, "a pleasure as always." "Alistair," she replied coolly, shaking his hand with a grip that suggested she could crush it if she chose to, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "Let us begin. I have a flight to Milan at 3. Her team, a phalanx of lawyers, accountants, and advisors, sat along one side of the table, like a jury. Alistair's team mirrored them on the opposite side. Contracts were already laid out, hundreds of pages representing months of negotiation. For an hour, they went through the motions, the final checks of a deal years in the making. Alistair was masterful, his command of the details absolute. He spoke of synergies, of market domination, of a future forged in their combined strength. He quoted projections, referenced market analyses, painted a picture of an unstoppable corporate juggernaut that would reshape global commerce. He was winning. He could feel it. Isabella's team was nodding. The lawyers were satisfied. It was all falling into place like a perfectly executed symphony. "And so," he concluded, leaning forward with a confident smile, steepling his fingers, "with your signature, Isabella, we don't just create a new company, we create a new world order. Finch Rossi will be more than a merger. It will be an empire that spans continents, that shapes markets, that defines the future of—" Isabella listened, her face unreadable, her posture perfect. Her gaze, however, wasn't on his face. It had drifted down to his collar. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. For 10 long seconds, she said nothing. The silence became suffocating. Alistair's smile began to feel stiff, like a mask that no longer fit properly. "Is there a problem?" he asked, a hint of his earlier impatience creeping back into his voice. Isabella leaned forward slightly, her movements deliberate. "There is, Alistair, a rather significant one." She gestured with a single manicured finger. "Your collar." Confused, Alistair glanced down. For the first time, he saw it. Next to the faint water spot was a small, vivid smear of dark red, lipstick. He instinctively tried to brush it away, his fingers scrubbing at the fabric, but it was stubbornly smeared into the fine Egyptian cotton. "A minor mishap at a cafe this morning," he said dismissively, forcing a laugh. "It's nothing. Some clumsy woman bumped into me. You know how these public places are." "It is not nothing," Isabella said, her voice now as cold and hard as a diamond. She reached into her handbag, a Hermes Birkin that cost more than most people earned in a year, and retrieved a small, elegant lipstick case. She opened it with a soft click. The shade inside was a deep, dramatic crimson, the color of Venus blood or expensive wine. "This is Midnight Dahlia, a custom blend created for me by a cosmetics artisan in Paris. There are only 3 tubes in existence. One is in my vault in Geneva, one is in my dressing room in Milan, and the third," she held it up like evidence in a trial, "is right here." The room fell to a deathly hush. You could have heard a pen drop. Isabella continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Our 2 families have a long history, Alistair, a history built on trust and clearly defined boundaries. When your father and my late husband negotiated the foundations of our business relationship 30 years ago, they established rules, one of which is a personal and professional non-compete clause that extends to our inner circles. No entanglements, no conflicts of interest, a pact of trust, a pact you seem to have violated in the most intimate of ways." Alistair's blood ran cold. This was impossible. He hadn't been with anyone. He barely had time for relationships. His last date had been 6 months ago, and it had ended badly when she complained he checked his phone too much. "Isabella, I assure you, you are mistaken," he said, his voice straining to maintain its authoritative tone. "I have no idea how that mark got there. I told you, someone bumped into me. It was an accident at a cafe." Her gaze was withering. "The evidence is on your collar, Alistair, and evidence, as you know, speaks louder than words. This smudge tells me either you're having an affair with a woman in my family or my executive team, a direct breach of our trust agreement that would make this merger legally untenable, or," she paused, letting the moment stretch, "someone orchestrated this. Someone has access to my personal signature shade, and they used it to send a message that you are vulnerable, that you are reckless, that you cannot be trusted." She stood up, a queen dismissing a courtier. "In either scenario, you are a liability I am no longer willing to entertain. This deal is off. Our partnership is terminated. My legal team will be in contact with yours regarding the penalty clauses. They are severe." "Isabella, wait!" Alistair stood, panic flooding his system for the first time in his adult life. "We are done," she said, her tone final. "I do not do business with careless men, and you, Alistair, have proven yourself to be catastrophically careless." She turned and walked out, her team following without a single backward glance. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a coffin being sealed. Alistair sat there, stunned. His executives stared at him in horror. His chief counsel looked like he might vomit. Panic, a foreign and terrifying emotion, began to claw its way up his throat. His phone started buzzing incessantly. Text messages, emails, calls. He pulled it out with shaking hands. The news was already breaking. Financial websites had alerts. Rossi Corp kills Finch merger. Finch global stocks in freefall. Lipstick scandal torpedoes $1 billion deal. Someone had leaked it.
Within minutes, his phone was exploding, his stock was plummeting, investors were panicking. The carefully constructed house of cards he called an empire was collapsing, all because of a tiny smudge of crimson. He stumbled into the elevator, his hands shaking. The smudge, that damned smudge, Midnight Dahlia. He hadn't been with anyone. So how? The cafe, the chaos, the woman who bumped into him. It had to be a setup, a deliberate, targeted attack. His mind flashed back to the waitress, the calm, quiet woman he had assaulted with his words. She had seen everything. Was she involved, or just a witness? Either way, she was his only lead. She was the only person who might know who that woman with the lipstick was. He burst out of the elevator into the lobby, ignoring the reporters already gathering like vultures, shouting questions, thrusting microphones and cameras in his face. "Get me a car," he yelled at the doorman, "now!" He had to get back to that cafe. He had to find that waitress. His world was unraveling with terrifying speed, and he was no longer the hunter. He was the prey.
The next 24 hours were a blur of cascading failures. Alistair's stock had plummeted by 60%, wiping out billions in wealth. Key investors were pulling out, issuing statements about concerns regarding leadership judgment. His board was convening emergency meetings to discuss his removal. Major clients were terminating contracts, citing morality clauses. The king was being dethroned, and he was powerless to stop it. Alistair wasn't at Finch Tower. He couldn't face it. He was on a desperate quest, operating on no sleep and copious amounts of whiskey. The daily grind was closed, a handwritten sign on the door reading, "Closed for renovations, sorry for the inconvenience." He'd pounded on the door, peered through the windows. Nothing. He paid private investigators an obscene amount of money to find the waitress, Ilara Vance. They found her address, a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Brooklyn, the kind of place he'd never deigned to visit under normal circumstances. Now he stood before her door at 9 in the evening, his expensive suit wrinkled, his tie loosened, his arrogance stripped away, replaced by a raw, hollow-eyed desperation. He knocked, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. The door opened. It was her, Ilara. She looked exactly the same as she had in the cafe, calm, composed, as if the last 24 hours of his personal apocalypse meant nothing to her. She looked at him not with surprise, but with a calm, unnerving placidity, as if she'd been expecting him. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice even, "I wondered when you would arrive. You're earlier than I predicted. I thought the investigators would take at least 48 hours. You," he breathed, his voice hoarse, "you were there. You saw what happened. The woman who bumped into me. Who was she? Who sent her? Who's behind this?" Ilara's expression was unreadable. She stepped aside. "Why don't you come in? We have much to discuss, and I'd prefer not to do it in the hallway." He stepped inside. The apartment was sparse but clean, the home of a meticulous planner. Minimal furniture, books organized by subject, a laptop on a small desk, everything in its place. She gestured for him to sit on a modest couch. "I'll pay you," he began, falling back on the only tool he understood. Money solved everything. Money was power. "Whatever you want. I need a name. I need to know who did this to me." He pulled out his checkbook with trembling hands. $1 million. Right now. Just tell me who hired that woman." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. $1 million. Is that the price of a person's life? Or at least their silence? "What are you talking about?" His confusion was genuine. "I'm talking about my father," she said, her voice taking on an edge of steel beneath the calm surface. His name was Arthur Vance, a brilliant engineer. He invented a revolutionary water purification system, something that could have provided clean water to millions in developing nations. He founded a small company full of hope, Vance Technologies. Alistair stared, a dawning horror in his eyes. He remembered the name, Vance Technologies, a small competitor he had crushed a decade ago. They had a promising patent. He wanted it, so he took it. "You probably don't remember him," Ilara continued, her voice never rising, yet each word landed like a hammer blow. "Just another stepping stone on your path to greatness, just another footnote in your success story. But I remember everything. You initiated a hostile takeover, buried him in litigation he couldn't afford to fight, and launched a smear campaign that destroyed his reputation. You spread rumors about shoddy engineering, about safety violations that never existed. You planted stories in trade publications. You turned his investors against him. You destroyed his company, his reputation, and his spirit." She stood and walked to a small bookshelf, pulling down a framed photo. She held it up, a man in his 50s, graying at the temples, with kind eyes, standing next to a younger version of Ilara. "6 months after you destroyed Vance Technologies, he died of a heart attack. He was 54 years old. The doctors called it a medical event. I called it what it was. You killed him. Maybe not with your hands, but with your greed, your ruthlessness, your complete disregard for human life." Alistair was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "For 10 years, Ilara said, setting the photo down carefully, leaning forward, "I have planned this. I didn't want your money, Mr. Finch. Money means nothing. I wanted to take away the one thing you truly love, your empire, and I wanted to do it using your own methods against you." Her confession was chilling in its precision, its complete lack of remorse.